Welcome, another edition of Your Parents' Attic, a podcast devoted to your childhood. If you grew up in the 80s and the 90s, I'm Glenn, joined here by Greg.
Hello.
And this week's episode is not about a show or a thing or a food or a drink. It is about a man that if you have, if you watched any shows or listened to any shows or even some programs on the radio, you probably heard this man's voice or his sound effects. He is a man that is, from Doug, from doing sound effects for that show and voiceovers, the Mickey Mouse Club, the original one.
Well, no.
Well, 90s one.
Yeah.
The one that we grew up and watched. He is the very colorful, the very talented man known as Fred Newman. Now, that name might not be familiar with you, but like I said, if you watch the shows that we mentioned before, and there's plenty of other shows that he's been a part of, with his voice and his sound effects, but he is a man that if you watch all Doug and Who Framed Roger Rabbit and Nickelodeon shows and the Disney Channel and video games and movies, he is a man that was very prominent in the 80s and 90s when it came to entertainment. So we thought it'd be fitting to do a show about this man, Fred Newman, and kind of give you some sound bites of him doing these and the interviews and whatnot that he's done, because really, Greg, this man is an unsung hero when it comes to our childhood and different shows and different cartoons, because I don't think until you became an adult you didn't really know that Fred Newman, or this guy with the white hair, was behind these shows and all these sound effects and all these voices.
See, I strangely enough did.
Okay.
And I'm not saying that to be contrarian. I actually did. I actually found out about him from Reading Rainbow. He was on an episode of Reading Rainbow when I was a real little kid. And I was like, oh, it's that funny guy who makes sounds with his mouth. And he put out a book when I was, again, maybe 7, that I was never able to get out of the library because it was always checked out. I'd put a request in, never got it. It was always checked out.
The good old days.
Exactly. But then I remember, Mickey Mouse Club, and we'll get into all this.
Yeah.
But, I mean, there was other things that I didn't know that he was in until recently. Like, I had no idea he was in Who Framed Roger Rabbit.
Yeah.
Which is really cool because there's a lot of cool people that, were in that movie or involved in that movie anyways. But he was always, when I was younger, obviously once I was, hanging out with hot chicks and partying with hot chicks.
Yeah.
I wasn't following his career quite as closely. But I always knew he was always one of those guys that, it was him and Michael Winslow, those two guys. Everybody was always trying to impersonate him. Everybody was always trying to be like, I can do that, and you can't. But he was always really cool. He always seemed like, I don't know, just a really mellow kind of guy that, you could just say, hey, do this.
Yeah.
And he'd do it and it would sound perfect. Like it wouldn't, but at the same time it was very much him.
Yeah.
Skeeter on Doug.
Yeah.
Once you knew who he was, you knew that was him.
Exactly, yeah. It was, like I said, very, very talented man. 3 Emmys during his time in the 2000s, but he won, 4 awards, one in the 80s as well. Mm-hmm. Very, very talented man. And still, here at 64 years old, still doing stuff. He worked with the Muppets back in 2000, in the 1980s. So he's ingrained with a lot of shows that have, even now, are still popular with people our age and also our kids, people our age. Still a very popular man. So let's get into it. Here is some background about a man that you may or may not know, Fred Newman. Fred Newman's first job was at Newsweek, and he did some stand-up comedy, and he soon capitalized on his unique vocalizations. And a man signed Fred to write a best-selling book called Mouth Sounds, which was published in 1980. And there's actually a DVD 24 years later in 2004. And we all know Fred from Mickey Mouse Club, and we'll talk about that during the show. But other shows that you could hear Fred, his sound effects, and also see him as an actor: Who Framed Roger Rabbit, Men in Black, Wolf, Storybook World, Munchies, The Gremlins, Harry and the Hendersons, Grand Theft Auto 2, and probably the most notable, at least for us growing up in the 80s and 90s, was Doug.
Remember Doug from the 90s? Fred Newman co-wrote the music, did the sound effects, and many of the voices for the animated hit show.
Now, Fred hosted Livewire, a children's talk show on Nickelodeon in the early 1980s, and it was known for giving bands their first television appearance, including REM and Split Enz. And he was a host for the Halloween TV special game called Nick or Treat, which was on Nickelodeon. Now, Fred also worked with Jim Henson and the Muppets in the 1980s and was a contributor to Muppet Magazine. He also was the writer of The Muppet Show on Tour, the live show. In 1987, Newman played the lead role of Henson's CBS sitcom pilot Puppet Man, and he also appeared on the direct-to-video special called Neat Stuff to Know and to Do, which was in 1988. So Fred was very, very well known throughout, also, in the kids' realm of shows. Mickey Mouse Club, he hosted that show, a part of it, and we talked about that during the show as well. But Fred was very, very notable with his gray hair. You knew who he was, and playing the many, many characters on the show, and also voicing a lot of the sound effects and voiceovers for different skits. He also is part of a show, a radio show he does sound effects for. It's just a man that has done a lot with sound effects and acting, and is still doing a lot today. And he also, in the CBS interview, describes getting random phone calls from different Hollywood execs about doing just a simple sound effect for a movie.
Hello. Hey, how you doing? This is Joey. We got this movie with Sandra Bullock and Nicole Kidman, and this frog swallows a wedding band. Can you do that sound of a frog swallowing the wedding and then throwing it up? Could you do that? I said, yeah, I could do that. Could you do it right now? It's 9 o'clock in the morning. I'm in my PJs. I go, yeah, okay. So.
From 1989 to 93, he was part of the all-new Mickey Mouse Club, which launched the careers of many, many pop stars from Britney Spears, Kerry Russell, Justin Timberlake, Christina Aguilera, Ryan Gosling, and he also could be seen in the PBS reading series Between the Lions, which he also wrote for and provided animated voices. And he was a conductor for PBS's Lomax, The Hound of Music, and he won 2 writing Emmys for Between the Lions. He was part of the Doug and PB&J Otter and wrote songs for Doug's first movie. More recently, including in 2015, Fred Newman provided sound effects during live broadcasts of A Prairie Home Companion. Here's a little sample.
A submarine surfaced,
And so Garrison does that. When we go out, let's do something with office supplies. And, the next thing I know, my tie is... it's caught in a Xerox machine,
they were playing basketball, tennis. It's nothing but fun to be able to challenge Fred's genius because he's so far beyond what we ordinarily would do in radio. 2 rats, one of whom has the hiccups. A show that I did by myself would be too high-minded. And, so we bring in somebody who can do primates. And,
Now, my first experience knowing who Fred Newman, was, I didn't know him by name, but I knew him as I know he's not a creepy guy, but with my, as a 12-year-old, 11-year-old kid, who was that creepy old guy with Britney Spears and Kerry Russell and Justin Timberlake, Christina Aguilera and JC and Ryan Gosling and the all-new Mickey Mouse Club. And then you had this old guy, white-haired guy who would do crazy sound effects. I didn't know him by name, but I knew, how is this guy allowed in the new Mickey Mouse Club? Like, why is he here? Is he like the parental unit? Is he like the chaperone? Why? It was just very, very awkward. But he would, in the in the outro theme song, or even the end, he would do the quirky sound effects, like it was just very, very weird as a kid seeing an old man hanging out with a bunch of talented preteens. But that was my first introduction to Mr. Fred Newman. Obviously, growing older, that what he was involved and what he's done and how talented he is. But that was my first introduction to Mr. Fred Newman.
Yeah.
So very, very strange, but
that's where he got mainstream recognition.
Yeah.
Because when I think about him, I think about either Disney or Nickelodeon. Those are the two kind of things, and I was kind of the same way. Being the age that I was when Mickey Mouse Club came back, it was kind of weird having. And if I'm not mistaken, I'm trying to find it right now. I thought there was an adult female co-host as well.
Yeah, there was,
because there had to be the chaperones on.
Terry Misner.
Sure. Okay.
She was there, and yeah. So it was. Yeah, so I feel like the chaperone, but still, as a kid, like, why is this gray-haired man? Why is my grandpa hanging out with a bunch of kids? It was just felt
which is weird because he wasn't all that old then. We're talking 27 years ago, so he was 37. So he wasn't old. He's one of those guys that just had white hair, so he looked like he was old.
To me, he looked old.
Sure.
To a 6-year-old kid, he looked old.
Mawava Pryor, that was the lady.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Sure. But yeah, and I remember very little of Mickey Mouse Club. I remember them singing and dancing and doing songs, and I remember the
first crush was on the redhead girl from that show. I have no clue what her name is, but I know she has a red hair, and I loved her.
I was in love with Carrie Russell.
Oh.
It was Carrie Russell like all day, every day. She's
good choice,
just amazing, and I'm sure I like the redhead too because I've always had a thing for redheads. But then they had, was it The Party? Was that the name of the band that spun out from Mickey Mouse Club? That luckily, or unluckily, depending on who you ask, Fred Newman was not involved with.
I don't think they did like a lot of skits.
Yeah,
and like little sing along stuff.
I can't believe they haven't done anything with that stuff. That's one of the things that keeps coming up on this show when we talk about TV and video and that kind of format. I can't believe Disney hasn't found some way, given that you have. Think about anything in the last 50 years that you got that many stars out of.
Yeah.
And you can directly trace it back to Mickey Mouse Club.
I don't think it would work now because of cable TV and Netflix, and like people don't watch cable TV that much,
right?
Where sitting to watch a show every week like that.
No, I'm not saying new. I'm saying taking the old episodes and rerunning them.
Yeah.
Because again, you've got Britney Spears, Christina Aguilera, Ryan Gosling.
Yeah.
All these huge names. Maybe Fred Newman can let everybody tweet Fred Newman and
Does he have
complain to him. I don't know. Probably. Everybody does.
I don't think Fred Newman has Twitter.
That's something that I'm genuinely surprised that they haven't started rerunning. And it would be great for a guy like him because, he's doing some stuff now, and I'm sure we'll talk about that or it'll be brought up in one of the other segments. But he's one of those guys that's talented enough and can do enough that it would be kind of cool to see him getting more work.
Yeah.
Nowadays,
he is a busy man. His resume, so to speak, isn't really that known when it comes on his International Movie Database page. His last credits as an actor was in 2010 as himself. 2016 he was on CBS Sunday News Morning, so he does still make appearances here and there.
Sure.
Sound effects man for American Masters back in 2000. Sesame Street as himself. So he still does some stuff, but obviously not as he's not a predominant guy like he was back in the 80s and
right
90s.
But he would be perfect for kids shows. He was and he is. That's, you want to make kids laugh, funny sound effects, and he's the master of them. Again, him and Michael Winslow, that's it. They're like bookends.
Yeah. It was and like Doug Fun. I love Doug, and I'm sure we'll do an episode about Doug, all about Doug, and him providing those, the voice, and he does I know he does. Well, he did, would have like live shows where he would play the music that he provided, and the Doug Funny theme, and being Skeeter. That was nostalgia, man.
That was kind of his show, if you really think about it. He didn't do Doug's voice, he didn't do Patty's voice. He did Skeeter's voice. I'm sure he did he did all the sound effects. He did the majority of the music. I mean, that was kind of his thing. So even more so, again, I talk about, I remember him from an episode of Reading Rainbow, but it's Doug that really, and I remember him from Mickey Mouse Club, but the vivid things that I can actually remember that he did was all on Doug.
Yeah.
And it was perfect. I mean, we really should do an episode on that show, because I could talk about that show for an hour.
Oh yeah, definitely.
But he just had something that fit into that so perfectly.
Yeah.
Mickey Mouse Club, you go, oh, who's that weird old guy with all the kids? Doug, you couldn't see him, so his talent stood on its own, and it was perfect. It was perfect for that weird kind of world that Doug lived in. I would be genuinely interested. I don't remember off the top of my head what he did in Roger Rabbit, but that's another one where I'm sure it would probably blow my mind. Oh, I had no idea that was him in Roger Rabbit.
Yeah, he like I said, he was featured back in May here on CBS.
Okay.
On a Sunday morning, as a man creating sound effects for TVs and movies, and he's still very, very well known and very wanted when it comes to doing sound effects and sound engineering. And if you watch the video, and I'll pull some audio from it, or I did it previously before the segment, was him. He would take random objects. I know for the Doug Funny intro, he took a kind of like a one of those, a slingshot, but he took the Y, kind of like the chicken bone kind of, and he put bottle caps on the string and tied it to each part of the top of the Y of the slingshot, and he would bang it against his, it had like the like it had like the feel. So like he also is very resourceful when it comes to making organic sound and doing that, not just using regular instruments, which he uses, but still very, very talented in his own way. And you don't really see recognition for that because of the world of auto-tune and sound that's produced by computers, and no talent really goes into that, but it's a lost art, and he's one of the last of that breed when it comes to organic sound, organic voices, just being creative when it comes in all those sense for movies and TV and whatnot.
Sure. Well, and the other thing is, and this, I just was looking at that, or at his Wikipedia page, and the one thing, and this might be because this is real fuzzy and hazy for me, so for you it might have been a little bit before. The talk show that he did on Nickelodeon, in the beginning of Nickelodeon, Livewire.
Yeah.
Where they'd have bands on.
Is that the program where you download? Oh no, Livewire.
That's LimeWire. Yeah, I got a bunch of viruses from.
Or Livewire was the WWF show in the Saturday
starring
morning.
Vic Venom and Jim Cornette. Yeah.
Wrong show. I'm sorry. Oh, continue.
But no, it's I remember that, and he even looked old then. But I like the couple pictures that they showed of it. I totally have this real vague recollection. Nickelodeon in the beginning was a really weird place. Just Nickelodeon in the beginning was almost more like Adult Swim is now, where they just kind of did whatever they wanted and stuff got weird. And Livewire was a show where I want to say it was daily, and they'd have bands on, like the Ramones were on it.
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking about Nickelodeon. The Ramones went on Nickelodeon and played, and Africa Bambaataa and the Zulu Nation were on. And it was really different, and he was the host of it. Fred Newman was the host. So that's another thing where, obviously, I'm sure there's almost nothing anywhere online for it, because we're talking 80 to 85.
Yeah. Way long ago.
Yeah.
But yeah.
But I mean, he was, again, I associate him with Mickey Mouse Club and then Nickelodeon. He did Nick or Treat, which, was the yearly Halloween thing they did.
Yeah.
But he was always one of those guys, like, I didn't know he was even still working. It kind of bums me out, because he's a really talented guy that could do lots of really interesting things in the world that we live in now, because you get lots of impressionists. You get a lot of people that can sound like somebody else.
Yeah,
that's easy.
Yeah,
kind of.
And like I said, computer sounds are easy to do now. It's
right.
the organic from a person sound is not really wanted that much anymore, which is sad.
Right, but I mean, imagine giving him a deal where he reads children's books. You know, what he did on Reading Rainbow. Just have him do audiobooks. He's doing all the sounds. He's doing the sound effects. He's doing different voices. He could make tons of money from that.
In 2008, he did Lomax.
Okay.
The Hound of Music, which was a non-Muppet show, but he started himself in that. So he, like I said, that's recent. That's 8 years ago. So he is doing shows now. But yeah, he's a man that, if you do not know, you are, bringing back, Doug Funny and Mickey Mouse Club, the all new one, and other shows, Muppets, that he was a part of, and he was that, the guy with the white hair, the old grandpa-looking guy, even though he wasn't that old.
Well, and he was, facially he wasn't old-looking.
Right.
It's just, he's
hair.
like Ric Flair. Like, he has just platinum hair.
He is the Ric Flair of sound effects, voice sound effects, and voiceover guy.
What does that make Michael Winslow, though?
He is the Ron Simmons.
That's where I was going to go with it too, and that's taking it to a different level.
Yeah.
But no, he's really great, and Fred Newman. Like when you originally said that, we should do an episode about Fred Newman. I was like, I don't know, but the more I read about him and you realize what the guy did, he totally does it. Like he's a huge part of, I think technically Generation X, you're probably Generation Y, but that's our generations right there.
Yeah.
Was the stuff that he did. He was a huge part of it. And that's not counting the video game work he did or anything else. Just, Mickey Mouse Club and the stuff he did with Nickelodeon. That's it. He's made.
Yeah. Just like I said, a man that is very, now now you can connect his voice or sound effects to certain shows that you obviously can still recall in your mind that you watched when you were a kid. So now thanks to us here at Your Parents Attic, you can reconnect and really appreciate the creativeness and art that Fred Newman provided to many generations and still is today. So Fred Newman, everybody, that is our show dedicated to the man behind many, many, many cartoon faces and many, many sound effects and themes. And if you want to know more about Fred Newman, his stuff is all over YouTube.
Yeah.
He's still out there doing, different tours and being a part of different companies when it comes to doing voiceover and sound effects and whatnot. So he's still very, very, very busy. And it's good to see because, like you said, it's hard to get his early stuff, now. But with him doing the Doug Funny song here in 2016 in front of a crowd of 30-year-old somethings that, love watching that show, it's still good that he's still out there doing that kind of stuff. So before we wrap the show up, we want to give you our old school commercial of the week.
It's the truth! Your principal can't smile, can't swim, can't rap, and I can't stand bubble tape. Your school bus driver can't drive, wears curlers, makes funny noises, won't try bubble tape.
No way, Jose!
Bubble tape. It's 6 feet of bubble gum for you, not them.
This has been Your Parents Attic. You can find us on iTunes. You can find us on Libsyn, Google Play, Stitcher, all the podcast platforms. You can go on our Facebook page and comment and give us some ideas for our next show. And you can also follow us on Twitter. We're on Twitter as well. Give us a follow. And like I said, like our page on Facebook. So we'll talk to you guys next week.
Seriously, turn the light off. I'm tired of paying for it. You don't pay the electric bills. Take a look at it. It's crazy. Turn the light off and go to bed.
What